Okay, let's proceed with episode 4 in our study of relational databases and the relational database constraints. In this episode, we will be discussing some of the inherent constraints that exist in a relational database, one of those being the superkey. So why don't we go ahead and determine right now that superkey will be the mystery word for this episode. Okay, let's get started. Constraints are restrictions on the actual values in a database state. These rules are either simply part of the relational database model or they are established at the database design stage. Constraints that are based on rules inherent to the relational database model are referred to as inherent constraints. For example, two identical records cannot exist in a relational database table. Constraints that are designed or that can be directly expressed in schemas of the data model, typically by specifying them in a data definition language, are called schema-based constraints or explicit constraints. A third category of constraint cannot be directly expressed in schemas of the data model, and therefore must be expressed and enforced by application programs. We call these application-based or semantic constraints or business rules. Let's make business rules our mystery word for this video. Business rules. And most commonly, when I'm talking to you about these kind of application-based constraints, I use the term business rules. Okay, when we start talking about defining constraints in the design of the database, what are we talking about? Well, for example, here, we can define a student ID number as an integer 7 characters long. You're defining a data type and another constraint being the length. Or we can define a GPA as being a real number. You're defining a data type and 5 characters long, 3.345. Or we could define a attribute as being a character data type, a string, 10 characters long, 20 characters long, 30 characters long, whatever we choose. Data type, and the data type is a constraint on the database, and so is the length of the record. Booleans. We can say that a particular attribute is a Boolean value, meaning that it is either on or off, or it's true or false. We can define an attribute as being of a fixed length. It does not vary. Or we can define it as variable length field. All right, if we had a attribute that was 30 characters long, for example, if you allowed the attribute first name to be 30 characters long and somebody input the first name Ted, well, you would have 3 characters being actually used and 27 characters blank, which can cause you problems at formatting time of reports and so forth. But if you define these things as variable length fields, you're good to go. We can define a particular attribute as being a date or a time or whatever. And there are all kinds of other special data types that we might create in the process of all this. One of those implicit constraints is called a superkey of a relation. The superkey specifies a uniqueness constraint that no two distinct tuples in any state can have the same value. Every relation has at least one default superkey, and that's the set of all of its attributes. In fact, a superkey is any combination of attributes that can be uniquely used to identify a database record. A table might have many superkeys. A superkey can have redundant values, however, so a more useful concept is that of a key which has no redundancy. A key of a relation schema is a superkey with the additional property that removing any attribute from the set that makes up that key leaves a set of attributes that's no longer a superkey. A key satisfies two properties. First, Two distinct tuples in any state of a relation cannot have identical values for the attributes in the key. This first property also applies to a superkey. Second is that it's a minimal superkey. That is a superkey from which we cannot remove any attributes and still have a uniqueness constraint if condition 1 holds. This property is not required by our superkey. Okay, let's take a break here and submit our mystery word. Go out to coursework and complete the Check My Knowledge quiz. And when you're ready, come on back and we will proceed.